Mhm. Okay,
Okay, sure.
Okay, let's begin. Hello and welcome everyone to our first Digital Humanities workshop, jointly organized by the Department of Religious Study and RL Graduate Council of the University of West. My name is Miraj Sake, Chair of the Department of Religious Study. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Alex Amy. Alex Amy is a PhD student in the Department of Religious Study at the University of West. He is currently working at Google as a software engineer, and he worked for IBM as a cloud architect and was a part of the IBM Cloud Development Lab team. His primary areas of expertise are cloud computing, J2EE application development, and security. Alex has published 9 papers and 3 patents and is a primary author of the book Developing and Hosting Application on the Cloud. The topic of today's workshop is Introducing NTI Buddhist Text Reader. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alex Amy.
Thanks, Miraj. I appreciate it. Let me start some sharing. Can I share? Let me try again. There we go. All right. Miraj has already introduced me, so let's skip on and to the agenda. So here's what I'm going to cover on this presentation. Firstly, I'll talk about the problem that the Chinese Buddhist text reader try to solve. And then I'll talk about, introduce the readers, actually several readers. I'll introduce those and give an overview of the basic features and a demo. And then I'll talk about some of the new features that use machine learning and have a demo of those. And then finally, I'm going to do a little bit of recruiting advertisement at the end to try and recruit some more volunteers for the project, for the HB Reader project, which is a humanistic Buddhism reader. All right, let's get into it. What problem are we trying to solve? The problem is trying to make the Chinese Buddhist teachings more accessible. And why would we do this? Because it takes a high degree of skill and time-consuming research to translate canonical texts, and literally professor level of skill, or at least graduate student level of skill, and a lot of language skills in order to translate text. They involve historic language and Sanskrit terms in Chinese transliteration, and it's quite difficult. And this limits the speed of that the text can be translated at. However, there's just a huge volume of text to translate. So it seems like kind of a mission impossible. In fact, they've been in the translations, been in the works for well over 100 years since the first sutras were translated by the early English missionaries, such as Samuel Beal. And we still don't have even a full list of the titles of the English translations. A full list of translated titles of all the texts in the Taisha, let alone other canons. So what the goal is here is to reduce the toil that translators face in doing translations and increase the number of translators that are able to do this work by bringing the traditional artifacts we have in scholarly translation into like a digital desktop. In particular, I want to keep reviewed and high quality translations, published translations. I want to keep citations and keep translation notes. And at the same time, make everything faster and more effective. How can we do this? Well, the opportunity we have here is that actually many texts have already been translated. We have a huge body, and it's certainly a minority of texts that have been translated, but every year, new texts are translated and published. So we can make it, we can leverage those and other artifacts besides, with dictionaries becoming better, making electronic versions of them, using modern computing algorithms with indexing, machine learning, and other natural language processing algorithms, which, although these are not perfect, they can greatly improve the accessibility of the canon and the productivity of the translators. So productivity, what do I mean when I'm talking about productivity? Think about what you spend a lot of your time doing if you've ever done translation work or looked at canonical text. Spend a lot of time looking up stuff in the dictionaries. We can do that faster. We can put these literally all and mouse over situations, so you can do it very fast. Also searching through canonical texts. Searching with paper used to be very time consuming. Even electronic forms of the text, the search tools have been substandard, and I aim to improve that. Also trying to find out if somebody's already translated something before, something similar to that before, to give you a head start. These are the kind of things that the reader software tries to solve. Here are the readers. The first one, which is on the title, there's the NTI reader. I think it's the main one. It's at ntireader.org. It's NTI stands for Nantian Institute. This is the Nantian Institute reader. And it's got the Chinese text of the Taisho Tripitaka. And just to give you an idea of the size, there's already several million characters in that. That's actually just a part of the corpus out there. A HB reader is the Humanistic Buddhism reader. This is got the text of Venerable Master Xing Yun's collected works. And there's a third one here, the Chinese Notes project, which is ChineseNotes.com, which is a historic corpus of literary Chinese, such as the Confucian classics, the 24 standard histories, many large corpus of historic Chinese writings. In addition to that, there's kind of a collection of other related software. There's a Chrome plugin. So if you want to, what you want to read is not in the list of those three contained in those three websites, you can install the Chrome plugin. And for some private source material that we're doing in foreground sound translation, I've created a translation portal. We actually have to use a login to access that. What's the difference between the different readers? The corpora or the body of texts in them are different. One, the NTI reader being the Taisho, the Chinese section of the Taisho, HB reader being Venerable Master's writings. So the corpora differ. The dictionaries differ too. The dictionary is actually partitioned and then combined. The partitions are combined, and they're partitioned into irregular Chinese English, Buddhist terminology, proper names, and phrases. So they're partitioned to eliminate some things that can confuse the reader. When, for example, when we're looking at classical or historic Chinese text, we would potentially get confused by some modern names. For example, the name Huawei. Huawei, two very common Chinese characters. And well, anyway, I'll show you a bit more detail on how that can confuse the reader in a little bit. So slightly different features. I'll get into that as well. The different bibliographic databases. Clearly, there's a lot of bibliographic information on the Chinese canon, Buddhist canon, that differs from bibliographic data on Venerable Master's writings and secular Chinese writings, and different web design. So they look a bit different. And that is basically the templates and style sheets. Open source and copyright. So basically, there is a combination of historic and modern texts here and software. Where possible, it's open source. The NTI reader, all the artifacts there are open source. Chinese Notes also open source. The software also open source. However, there's some that is copyrighted, which is the HB reader, Venerable Master Xing Yun's writings in the HB reader actually copyrighted. So they're free to read, of course, but they cannot be republished without permission. Also the Glossary of Humanistic Buddhism too, produced by Foreground Shan Institute of Humanistic Buddhism. What do I mean by open source here? The linguistic assets such as dictionary and so on are released under a Creative Commons license that allows anybody to freely reuse them, and with attribution. And Apache is the software that allows anybody to reuse the software as well. So the basic features here, We have dictionary lookup. I just look up stuff in the dictionary, either a single term or multiple term. Mouse over and pop over of Chinese terms in the texts. Bilingual contents and navigation, and bibliographic information. And we'll see how that's used here. Here's a screenshot of the Chinese word ren, and you'll see here that the dictionary is like a typical bilingual Chinese-English dictionary, Chinese to English. And it differs from some Buddhist dictionaries that are more like, they have a lot of encyclopedic entries with a long like text about what ren means and so on. Here it doesn't have a lot of that. It's got the different senses are enumerated, both secular senses and the Buddhist senses. There's Hanyu Pinyin. If the traditional differed from the simplified, there'd be both. There is some differentiation between modern and literary Chinese, and there is when we get into the Buddhist terms, there is a lot of equivalence in canonical language, such as Sanskrit. Here we hear Xanthi, and Pali, Japanese, and Tibetan. They're basically the four canonical languages that are used, with more of an emphasis on Sanskrit. And there's some references here. You can see here. I'll get onto the references in a bit, but let's have a look at these. Here is the NTI Reader website. It's what it looks like. And let's look up that word there. See how to do it. It's very easy. All you do is just put it in the text field and click enter, and it will find the term for you. And there it is, same as the screenshot. And also you'll see there's a few other features here. It'll show what other terms that thing is contained in, and also the canonical occurrences where that term occurs, and collocations. And here we have the HB Reader website that I mentioned before, Venerable Master Hsing Yun's collected works. You can do the same thing and look it up in the dictionary there. Here's the Chinese notes one, which has the, I won't spend too much time on this today, but it has basically a lot of Chinese classics, master's literature, Mengzi, Mozi, Guanzi, histories, the 24 standard histories, some other text, other histories, bamboo annals, some other literature and collections, and some stuff on Taoism, historic dictionaries, and some other hand literature, other post-hand literature, Chenzi Wen, 1,000-character classic, and other material. That is probably the last image on that. And I also mentioned the Chrome plugin, so you can go to the Chrome web store and install the plugin for this. If you happen to want to use this reader for text for other websites, basically. And let's get back to this. Okay, so there we saw how to look up a single term. That's probably the most basic thing you can do with the website. So where do those words come from? And there's quite a lot of words in. There's probably about 150,000 terms with 20,000 Buddhist terms, which is quite large. So you might want to ask, like, where does that stuff come from? There is a number of sources. I've been doing this for a long time, and probably the three most common sources for the general vocabulary are CCC Dict, which is an open source database, open source dictionary, the Unihan database, which is the, if you've ever heard of Unicode, this is produced by the Unicode Consortium. It's a large database of Unicode characters, and Wikipedia, which is got a lot of terms in it, even Buddhist terms and other useful terms. There's a lot of historic sources here. For example, Etel, French scholar, Giles, Ding Fubao, who was a 19th century Chinese scholar of Buddhism, and Maha Vibhuti, which is a Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese dictionary. I'm not sure the exact age of that. I think it's Sung Dynasty. Moni Williams, who's another 19th century Sanskrit to English dictionary. Kern and Beale are actually texts that are early translations of texts. Kern Kern translated the Lotus Sutra, and Beale translated many texts that are useful. These are out of copyright and can be used. Some sources with permission of Foguang Shan, especially the Foguang Shan Glossary of Humanistic Buddhism, and some translations from Chinese sources, especially the Guoyu Zilian, which is from the Taiwan Ministry of Education. It's a great source. It's really an excellent source. Modern sources, modern dictionaries with citations and some rewording. And literally, it's a couple of sources which are excellent, but just for certain reasons, I'd never use them. Just to note there, never used the Oxford Chinese English Dictionary. I never used, rarely used DDB. It's an excellent source. I don't want to be critical of it at all. It's really excellent. Just those two sources have unusual terms of use, so I like to avoid them. Types of dictionary entries. There are several types of dictionary entries. You already know those. Standard, normal Chinese, secular Chinese, and Buddhist terminology. It's actually a little bit more than that. There is literary Chinese and modern Chinese. What do I mean by literary Chinese? Some people might use the word classical Chinese. It's not actually correctly true to say that Buddhist texts are written in classical Chinese, except for maybe some of the Han Dynasty, very early texts. Most of them are written in what we might call in Chinese Guwen, which literally means old Chinese, or might be, you might see it used as like literary Chinese. It's basically Chinese before the 1920s. Chinese didn't change that much from the Han Dynasty to 1920s. It did change, but we've got this big block we call literary Chinese. It's maybe not a great word because some of the Chinese most of the Chinese in the Buddhist canon is not written to be literary. It's written to be easily understood, at least for people of the time. Buddhist terminology, so many entries are Buddhist terminology. And some entries are basic vocabulary, which you wouldn't necessarily consider Buddhist terms, but we want to know the definitions in canonical languages, such as numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How do you say those numbers in Sanskrit, Pali, Japanese, and Tibetan? That is important if you're trying to read parallel texts, such as Sanskrit text or Pali text against the Chinese. Proper nouns, people, places, titles of text. Often these are included in dictionaries, but when you start to get into it, there's kind of an endless list of places and people, and it gets kind of big. So I've separated them out. And phrases to demonstrate word usage and to be able to find similar phrases to things you might want to translate. So please just stop me anytime you want to ask a question. Multiple term lookup. If you ever battled through a difficult Chinese text, this is a good feature for you because you can look up, instead of having to look at one term after the next term after the next term, you can just look up all the terms, all in one shot. You can just cut and paste. I've cut and paste the sentence from the canon here, just relatively random one, not from a well-known sutra or anything, and cut and paste it in there. The website will break it out and discover the multi-character words within that passage of text. So we have here canon and yin sheng, and for example, the multi-character words are just 2 characters, but it'll pick up longer characters as well, and which is similar to the way it analyzes texts, larger texts, and understands and discovers the multiple character entries within the text. And it can save a lot of time. And but some people have asked me, how do you do that? And actually have found errors in that. And this is a topic in itself I call word segmentation. That is, the challenge here is that Chinese text doesn't use spaces to separate the words. So you have to figure out what the words are. You could say every character is a word. In some sense, many characters are words, but also we know that a lot of those characters belong together. So I have an algorithm that does a heuristic optimization to look for the longest terms. When I say what I mean by heuristic, I mean that it's a good guess. It actually is not a formal optimization that always comes up with the most accurate answer. So it's not perfect. Also, sometimes the results are wrong. And however, I've done some studies on this, and I believe that it's about 99% accurate. People have come to me and shown me mistakes. And please, if you find mistakes in the please tell me. I would much prefer you tell me than don't tell me. It's been very valuable to me, those people who have discovered those mistakes and pointing them out. And I found that even though it's mostly accurate, sometimes these mistakes have been kind of egregious mistakes. And I just mentioned the example Huawei before. If you look at the word Huawei, the Chinese word Huawei, we can type it in. Actually, pretty common Chinese characters. Huawei. I think it's that one. Huawei. Oh, just hold on. There we go. So it won't, but if we look in somewhere else, Huawei, it's a company. The problem is, this is just an example I'm picking on. I don't want to pick on Huawei in particular as a company, just the word. And the thing is simplified. People are probably more familiar with the simplified for Huawei because they're mainline company. But those two characters are very common characters, both of those. If they will appear in the Chinese canon together just by accident. So if we're scanning the Chinese canon and we see those characters together and we tell people that that means Huawei, the company, it's a kind of an egregious mistake that it's understandable how you might make that mistake, but it's an egregious mistake. And in fact, you can find many examples like that of companies because people try to name companies in memorable ways. So that is one of the reasons I partitioned these the dictionary into different parts and excluded things like company names, because we don't expect company names to appear in the Buddhist canon. I was going to show just in terms of demo here, let's see how that works. And we can say, so you can just type in multiple and it'll just come back like that. And you can just navigate to the specific ones. So there we go. There. And it's convenient. And that's why it's its purpose, to be convenient. So this is the reason for the partitioning and labeling. So it can avoid those kind of egregious errors. Now, hop over when reading text. And this is the basic thing when we're talking about like as a reader. It's to help. Basic purpose is to help people read text. So let's see how we do that. We can go here to the list of texts, and we see the Taisho canon, the Chinese part of it. It only goes up to about volume 55. Taisho has about 100 volumes in it. The last, say, 45 volumes are Japanese, and which are, there's a debate about the copyrightability of it because they're historic texts. Many of them going back over 1,000 years, but they've been published by the University of Tokyo in 1932. So not quite out of copyright yet if you go by that publication date. And the Chinese section has been put in the public domain in collaboration with the Dharma Drum University in Taiwan as the Seed Beta project. So, and that's where I got it from, Seed Beta. So here we have the texts and the English titles. As far as I have been able to put the English titles for them, I have. You'll notice some of them maybe Sanskrit titles instead. Some, in fact, only have an opinion. Let's look at that, the long discourses of the Buddha. And also note here, there is some bibliographic information, quite a lot, because some of these have more and some of these have less bibliographic information. You can just click on that and find this is the text, the first first scroll of the Taisho canon. And we can do it in a couple of ways. We can just mouse over there, the 4 arguments, or we can click on it and we can see those are the 4 arguments, and we can break down in case the parsing or the word segmentation is incorrect. You can see the different parts of it as well. And you can click on there to just find more details about that word. So that is what I mean by reader. And where to actually get the text from. So I mentioned C Beta, which is the collaboration between Dharma Drum College and University of Tokyo on the Taisho Tripitaka, digitization of the Taisho Tripitaka. Mastersingyun.org is the official website from Fo Guangshan with Venerable Master's collected works, the Chinese language website. But a lot of the Chinese historical literature from Wikisource, why I believe is thorough in their investigation of the copyright and or copyright freeness of the text, so that can be reused. And I showed the bilingual navigation there, so you can see the English translations of the text and the there. So I'll skip over that. And we mentioned biblically, a good example here may be 265, which is a one of the esoteric sections. I did a project a couple of years ago in Professor Lancaster's class on the esoteric section. And because I had struggled and hadn't been able to find even titles for a lot of these, I did a project. I found a lot more. So there is bibliographic information and about it, and it helps somebody get a little bit of background instead of diving right down to the text. If you wanted to understand it from an English perspective, either as an English speaker or somebody Chinese speaker who wanted to translate it, you can find English references and translations and parallels. And then you can go down to the text to a little bit of details. Also mentioned phrase database. So the highlighted text in green here are phrases in the phrase database, where that longer phrase is, there's a translation of that full phrase, and it's quite useful in finding the place. If there's a published translation, often those published translations just show the English only, and it's hard to relate to the Chinese. So this will tell you that page number, page 19 in Goebbels' translation is that Chinese text. And then it's got a few of these, so they can quickly align the Chinese and the English, even with copyrighted translations, because I've only grabbed a handful, like a scattering of translations to basically place mark that to align them. Interesting, I lost the full screen. There we go. Okay, that covers the basic features. Let's go on to some of the relatively newer features. Full text search. It's been around for a while, but I've improved it a little bit. So I'll talk about that. Translation memory and phrase database. We just saw a couple of phrases, so I'll talk about what we can do with a phrase database. And machine translation with glossary. So full text search. Why do a full text search? Don't we have it already on other websites like SAT or CBeta? It turns out that I felt that they, for one, somebody from Fo Guangshan asked me to do the full text search. So I did a bit of research on it and found it, yes, definitely. Some of the websites out there have substandard search utilities. And here's an example of stuff they miss. Here we have in Venerable Master's writing about the Dhammapada. He has a quote. Here we go. 水滴水微见 jianying da qi. So when the water drops, even though water drops are small, they can gradually fill a large container. Notice that the second character in Venerable Master's writing uses this D. Oh, it uses this D, sorry, up the top, which is the normal shui D. That's like the water drop. But when we go into the canon, we see the canon has this D. Why does it have this D? Well, it was printed a long time ago. It's an old text, and also it's gone through the publication process was in Japan. So there's multiple ways where these variant, archaic variant or Japanese variant characters can get into the text. And the problem it creates is it creates a problem for search. It means if you searched on that text in SAT, you never find it. So we have to do a bit of work to make that findable. The second problem with full text search is that we might be searching on very common words. So if we look at this word here, 回国, it's not super common, but it's fairly common. If you do a search in the canon, you find a lot of occurrences. So you get this, what do you do with the list of like 300 matches, 400, 500 matches? What do you do with that list? You're kind of like, oh, there you go. So if you did it on Google, web search, they will give you, search for BMW on Google, it will give you the BMW website. It won't give you the 1 million websites that mention BMW. So we want to do kind of the equivalent here. So we're looking for the most important ones. So one way that the NTI reader will do that, and the HP reader as well, is we'll rank it also. It's got some criteria. So one criteria, and I'll talk about the criteria, is that if it's, here we have the title of a text called 佛说文书会国经, that is Manjushri teaches repentance. So it appears in the title, so somewhat more important. So we'll rank that more highly than if it just occurs in the body. So how do we actually do that? There is a whole model of the of how text is, and it's not just as simple as like scanning through the entire text. There's a model of the text that involves some machine learning. It involves a process called vectorization, where we basically split up the text into the terms, and we count out how many times they appear, and bigrams, that is the two terms next to each other, and then presence in titles. And use a formula called, the basic formula is called term frequency, inverse document frequency. Term frequency being how many times the thing occurs. Inverse document frequency is a measure of how rare the term is. So we'll like a word like ren, person, that occurs everywhere. So it's very common. It doesn't matter if you're searching for ren, but if you're searching for 回国, kind of a less common term, it will put more importance on that repentance term. Actually, but I use a variant of that called the BM25, which actually is a little bit better, has some improvements over the basic TF-IDF that, for example, if a term occurs 10 times in a text, it's actually probably not 10 times more important than if it occurs one time in a text. So it makes some allowance for that. And then how do we combine these two? The frequency terms, frequency of bigrams, and the presence in the titles. We need to combine them in a certain way, figure out which are more important than others. And I do that with machine learning. So create a training set of search results, and I went through and judged which ones are the best, and ran a machine learning model on there, in this case, logistic regression, to make a model of how to weight those three things, features. And then, so it can give you combinations of things like it's kind of a reasonable way of combining these such that we can solve these problems here of how do we discover that if we got a longer phrase matching the different parts of the phrase, and how do we do this if we've got just a single phrase, a single word, but looking for the importance. So we can solve that with some machine learning. It's very simple machine learning, actually, but it still is. And here's what we got. He's looking at what machine learning will give you is it will give you a prediction of relevant versus not relevant. And the thing is, you can never be sure if the thing is irrelevant. That is, if we look at something like this, it's got maybe 6 or 7 terms in there. How do we know when we have the best match? Or if we have a match we just shouldn't even show to users? It's hard to know. we have this kind of a relevance, not relevance trade-off, and we have to make a decision. So this is also where machine learning comes in. When to draw that point of you believe the thing is not relevant, and it's based on training of the model versus human judgments, and it can give a point basically when to when to not show the results. So you don't just show that somebody 3,000 results. So basically, so it maybe has one of those characters and it has shui in it. Otherwise, you just end up showing the whole canon to the user. Also, there is some improvements here to basically give some visual help to the user that we see, which we call snippets. And here is the example result, Hui Guo. So you see here, this snippet's got the red highlight, and it'll tell you too, similar title. So we can actually look at that. Let's do that example. Cool. Actually, I'll just type it. Go to full text search. Type it in. First one. There we go. So this is what I'm talking about, snippets here. And the second one, actually, we didn't get as the top result. But actually, if you look at this, also has Weibo in the title. Just that there may be more criteria that we can add here to make this actually even better. So there, we'll talk about snippets here, so we can see some visual cue as to how relevant it is. Quotation database. What is a quotation database, and why would I want one? So in Chinese text, we have a lot of phrases, and the koans are, a well-known example. Koans are these like pithy phrases, and people keep re-quoting these koans, gong'an in Chinese, they're actually quoting other things. They're quoting that's why they call them cases, literally cases, because they're examples from historic circumstances or historic stories, and then the masters explain them, and then people re-quote the koan. So we end up with these phrases that get a history of like repeated use throughout the canon and the commentaries on the canon. And they're a good example of phrases. Here's an example here. The commander of the flying cavalry enters the flying camp. Fei qi jiangjun ru lu ting. And that's actually a koan, but it's also a reference or allusion to a story from the Han Dynasty about Li Guang, who's a commander who's the flying general. Fei jiangjun. And he gets captured by the Xiongnu and he pretends to be dead and then he escapes. There's all this story about it. And here's another example here about arrows hitting the eagle, and usually one arrow hits fells the eagle, but one arrow could, by a skilled marksman, could maybe knock down 2 eagles. So we have these phrases, and they're interesting because usually they've got all kinds of variations. They're not always exactly the same every time. They're kind of similar. They've got a thread element of similarity. This has got arrow and it's got eagle. Here we've got arrow and eagle. But what's in between it can differ. So they can get complex. And besides koans, also in Chinese, we have idioms or chengyu. We have Sanskrit transliterations. We have terminology. We have text titles. We have all these examples of long phrases and all kinds of variations, which can be hard to discover and translate. So how do we handle those? What can we do with them? What I've done is a quotation similarity model. So look at a few different characteristics of these translations, these phrases rather, such as the different characters in them and how they're organized. Basically, unigram count, which unigram is just a single character, and the Hamming distance is the character and the position together. So combining whether the characters are in the phrase or not, regardless of position, and then also looking at how the phrase matches the position. Maybe you've got with a, say, 10 character phrase, and maybe you've got 2 characters matching, 3 characters, 4 characters, and trying to figure out what makes a match and how likely is that. If you've got a match, how likely is that to be, the same phrase or related phrase? And I use this model called decision tree classifier to decide whether it's the same thing or not. So here's an example. I just took this term here, it's Buddhist terminology, fei or fei kong jian. And if we just like say fei 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 kong jian, just change one, it doesn't match. Oh, yeah, fei fei kong men. Thank you, Max. That's why I need some help from native Chinese speakers on the project here. It'll be very useful. So we find the match. Okay, it tells us that we can break down and say that's not an exact match, but it's very similar to the term there. It just got off by 1 character. Okay, machine translation. Machine translation is getting better and better, but still nearly there, not quite there yet. Also, it's also missing a lot of Buddhist terminology. So what I've done here is use the HB glossary from the Institute of Humanistic Buddhism, published by Fogonshan, that uses the Fogonshan style for about, say, 3,000 or so terms. Combine that with Google Translate, so we can use that and write in the translation engine. So we can do machine translation. And turns out that it's not bad, it's good, because we get the convenience of Google Translate, but also we get the Buddhist terminology in there, at least a limited set of it. It works. It's not perfect, but it works, and it's publicly available there, so we can use it. Let's show you where it is before I get into explaining some of the problems. Let me just find an example. Let me just grab one from here. So we can even type something long. I'm ad-libbing it here. I haven't prepared this. Put that in there, and there we go. So you can see that, like, this is Google Translate, but actually it found the eight great human beings. Doesn't sound like quite the right one. 8 great human beings. So it is not perfect, but it's actually not terrible in a lot of cases. You can also compare it to actually just typing it in to look up the individual terms, and you can start. This is a sutra on the realization of the 8 great beings. I think it made this up. It actually didn't get that from the glossary. So you have to do a little bit of detective work to figure out what came from the glossary and what didn't. There's some helpers on translation quality to help you like review that, but actually it's a pretty good start in a lot of cases. Certainly not directly usable, but it can be used to help a translator get a head start. And let me expand on that a little bit. And I actually made some modifications to the glossary. I actually compared a few things. When I first used that, put the glossary into the Google Translate, I found that, in fact, Venerable Zhu Yue from Fogonshan also pointed out that actually looks worse than just Google Translate by itself, So I did some checking. I found she was right. I developed a test database here, test set of about more than 100 phrases, and she was definitely right. And she had another favorite one called DeepL, which is quite good, but they don't allow you to embed a Chinese glossary. Turned out DeepL was the best, Google was next best, and Google with the glossary was the worst. So digging into why that was, it was kind of disappointing. I dug into why, and I found that a lot of entries in the glossary confused the translation engine, and I had to remove things like sutra. It's just actually logical if you think about it a little bit. Things like the word sutra, jing, has many senses in Chinese. Like jing means like past, like 经过, I passed that, or 经验, experience, or other uses even besides that, even I think like latitude or something less common. So they were those kind of common terms which were in the glossary were confusing the translation engine. If we took them out, the translation engine actually in most cases was able to figure out what it should be, instead of just fixing it or hard coding it in the glossary. Another example, faith. The second problem was here, like faith is an example where sin, faith, it could be letter, but that could be confusing. But the thing actually turned out what was confusing was the faith, that character sin appeared in another of other terms, sinyang, which also means faith, or sintu, which means devotee. So that kind of overlapping of glossary entries also confused the translation engine. So it turned out I removed a number of those. I removed about over 200 of those out of 4,700 terms removed, and then the quality of translations actually improved greatly and got better than just the translation engine by itself. So that is that. And then there was a number of other sorts. There's a number of problems with machine translation. I do not want to claim it's perfect, but it still is helping translators. There's many, many problems actually. The glossaries, the parts of speech gets confused, idiomatic expressions are dropped, ambiguous stuff is dropped. Buddhist terminology not contained in the glossary is confused. Literary Chinese is not translated in general very well. The translation service just gives you an answer. Instead of like, if you gave a person something to translate and they couldn't translate, they would just tell you, I don't know how to translate this, or I'm not very confident on this translation. But if you give it to the Google Translate, it will just give an answer, and it may be a bad answer, but it will give you an answer. Also, there's no notes. If you do a translation, especially an academic translation, you'd want to have translation notes as such as like, this is a variant character of this other thing, or this is an unusual usage, or it refers to something, but Google Translate is not going to give you translation notes. So it has a number of problems. Despite those problems, it's probably better than nothing, and it even gives expert translators a head start. Anyway, so then there's a summary of the ways it's using machine translation in the NTI reader and HB reader. And you know what's next? A lot of stuff to do. There's all kinds of stuff to do. You can imagine, like, this is a very open-ended area. The machine learning models can be improved. That's one of the things I want to do. There's a lot of things, but what I'm actually wanting to do next is something that Venerable Miao Gong and Venerable Yo Zai have asked me to do next. And that is, in the HB reader, I currently have Venerable Master's collected works. Venerable Master has a large team of people helping to edit and collect his writings. In fact, when I say writings, actually have been accompanying Venerable Master for a number of years. He's elderly now already, but for a number of years, he's been giving many, many, many talks all over the place. He's been traveling the world, giving many presentations and Dharma talks, you know, like every day nearly, in China, in America, everywhere. And these have been recorded and transcribed and published. But it hasn't been, so there's the early version that the HB reader is based on is collected works, Wenji. And I did that some years ago. And in the meantime, the Venerable Master's, the team working on Venerable Master's writings has collected and collated and edited and published more of the writings, and actually done some better editing of them as well. And maybe as Venerable Master gave this a similar talk a number of times, and they made a version for publication based on that. They are his words, but they have been edited for publication. So now we have the complete works. The bottom line is we have complete works, and we also have collected works. Complete works being bigger, collected works being slightly smaller. We may actually want to keep both versions on the website. and have some parallel displays, and also better bibliographic data. So I'm looking for volunteers, and thankfully I've got a couple of people volunteered already. So thankful for them volunteering. Even if you haven't got a lot of time, I would appreciate anybody's participation, especially anybody from the University of the West, because you guys have skills that are very important. I already got corrected a number of times on my pronunciation just during this talk here, and I appreciate that. And I recognize that I can't be as good as a native speaker. Other people have different skills too. May have web design. I'm not a web designer. I'm really a software engineer and a student. So I could do some help in those areas. If you can do any one of these three things, Chinese and English, web design, or software development, I would appreciate your participation. And I understand that hours can be counted to IBF scholarship. And so I'd appreciate your help. And if you've got those basic skills, I'd be happy to have your help. And I can train in the additional technologies and so on that are involved in doing this. A number of technologies here. You don't have to know anything about machine learning or open source or anything. I can train on the details there, and we can work something out. We can define the tasks that fit people who can volunteer, as long as you've got those basic skills. So if you're interested, please just get me and say, if you see me around campus, please let me know, or email me, or otherwise, let anybody else know here, and they can help contact me. I really appreciate it. Anyway, I want to leave a few minutes for questions, if anybody's got any questions. Does anybody have any?
Anybody? Okay, let's thank you, Alex, for outstanding presentation, and we greatly appreciate it for doing this. And I myself, I use this NTI readers when I do reconstruction of Sanskrit texts. Very helpful. So I recommend everybody to use. Even if you don't read Chinese, still it's very useful. It's a lot of Pali, Sanskrit, all resources there. We can check, like cross-checking. It's very helpful. And so some of you need to go to class, right?
Yes.
So maybe we can take one question maybe from audience.
Yeah, please.
If you have any question, you can just ask directly, because we have a few students. We can.
Yep. Let me stop sharing here and go to the questions. Anybody got any questions?